The point that he made about prosperity, about buildings, the Victoria Terminus example that he put out there, that, we inherited our legal system, our democracy, our parliamentary democracy from them. Even if the British did this for their own interests, I think what he's perhaps suggesting is that we benefited from it. Now, is that a valid argument at all?
Well, I think that we have indeed got institutions that go back to the British era. But don't forget that it took an enormous amount of hard work by our freedom fighters to wrest some of these things from the British. If you look at the so-called parliamentary democracy the British gave us, number one, it was completely tarnished by their communal divisions of the electorate, so that Muslim voters could only vote for Muslim candidates for Muslim seats, for example. It was also tarnished by the fact that they did not enfranchise the entire Indian population. At a time when they first gave elections, it was for a handful of people. They gradually expanded the electorate from 1905 to 1921, from Minto Morley to Montagu Chelmsford, then finally the 1935 Government of India Act after many years of Indian nationalist agitation. And then finally the last election the British held were the elections of 1946. At that time, India's population was about 330 million. And the entire electorate of those eligible to cast a vote was about 30 million. Only people with property, with educational qualifications and other credentials the British valued were allowed to vote. So it wasn't democracy by any stretch of the imagination. It was only after we won our freedom and wrote ourselves a free constitution that India introduced the universal franchise and let everyone vote. The parliamentary system as such, there are merits and demerits. I do believe the British parliamentary system works extremely well in Britain. I think it's grossly unsuited to the Indian political reality. But that's a different conversation. Here in India, we vote for individual leaders, and we could probably have been far better off with a presidential system. But we decided we wanted what the British had denied us, and so we took it. When it comes to the law courts, as I said, it was there to dispense British justice. And today we're seeing some of the negatives of a system that is far more concerned with process than outcome. So every case is repeatedly adjourned in our country and goes on for decades in some cases. The English language has helped knit the country together, absolutely no doubt. And the truth is that had somebody else, for example, had the Marathas established their empire over India, maybe it would have been Marathi. Had the Mughals been able to retain real power, which they'd really lost by the beginning of the 18th century, the last few Mughal kings in the 18th century were essentially hostages of the Marathas. But had they continued, maybe we would have been speaking Persian. But India would have needed a linked language. It happens to be English because of historic circumstances. But I do want to say that to imagine that the British were being benign is an absolute insult to history, because the British were in it for themselves. They made no secret of that, essentially to each other. As late as the late 1920s, I've quoted in my book, a British Home Secretary is saying, we took India by the sword and we ruled it by the yardstick. We're there to get what we can from India. Let's stop all this hypocritical cant about being there for the benefit of the Indians. That's wrong. We're not. And at least the British admitted it to themselves. We should not now allow other people, especially not some right-wing American pundit, to try and pull the wool over our eyes. The British found in the late 19th century a justification, which was a post facto justification, to excuse themselves for their horrendous behavior, their killings, their rapes, their looting, because after the British putting down of what they call the Sepoy Mutiny, which we can hail as the Indian Revolt, or the First War of Indian Independence, as some historians called it, when they did that, they needed then to dress up their colonialism, their empire, in some sort of pretense. And the pretense was one of banal colonialism. But they never were interested in the well-being of the Indians. I absolutely do not accept that. There were individual Brits who were kind people, who did good things for good Indians in different places. But the fact is that doesn't excuse the fact that they were there in the service of a rapacious and ultimately illegitimate empire.